Hello? Can you see and hear me now? Hello? Hello? If you assure me that you can see me. Oh, okay, thank you, thank you. So you can see me and hear me, right? All right. Yes, so how are these scenes, such as the speech from Othello that I referred to, where Othello speaks what I said was a soliloquy, and yet there is Desdemona on the stage, or Hamlet speaks a soliloquy and there is Claudius on the stage praying, or Hamlet speaks another soliloquy, to be or not to be, and there could be Claudius and Polonius behind the curtain, and Ophelia on the stage, Ophelia, and Macbeth's Tomorrow and Tomorrow speech, where he speaks a soliloquy. Now, these are all variants of the conventional soliloquy because there are other characters present. In the case of Macbeth's Tomorrow and Tomorrow speech, there is Seton on the stage who has just brought him news of his wife's death. Now, how are these soliloquies then different from asides? Or why at all are they soliloquies and not asides? Because in asides also, as I pointed out, that there would be other characters on the stage, and the character speaking the aside would be speaking to the audience. Now, in the case of an aside, the character speaking the aside takes care to ensure that the other characters do not hear him or her. And so the character who would speak the aside moves away from the other characters, or already is at a certain distance from the other characters, so that the other characters supposedly cannot hear him or her. Macbeth's aside, which I referred to some time ago, or Cordelia's asides in the opening scene of King Lear, when Goneril tells her father that she loves her enormously, Claudius, who is standing close to the audience at one corner of the stage, Cordelia, who is standing in one corner of the stage close to the audience, says, "What shall Cordelia speak? Love and be silent?" That's an aside. Again, when Regan makes a profession of her love for her father, again very extravagantly, Cordelia speaks another aside. "And yet my love's more ponderous than my tongue," she says. So these are asides. Now, in an aside, the character speaking the aside, I repeat, ensures that the other characters do not hear him or her. Now, in a soliloquy, when there are other characters on the stage, as in the soliloquies that I've referred to, either it doesn't matter to the character speaking whether the other character or characters hear him or her. For example, when Macbeth speaks the Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow speech, he is not bothered about whether Seton hears him or not. He is in a trance. Poor man, he has just received the terrible news of his wife's death. When Hamlet speaks the to be or not to be speech, he believes that there is no one around. Unlike Macbeth, who knows when he is speaking an aside that Ross and Angus and Banquo are on the stage, or Cordelia, who knows that there are so many other people around. When Hamlet speaks with Claudius at prayer, "Now might I do it, Pat, now he is praying and now I'll do it," that's a little different. Either he assumes that Claudius is so deep in prayer as to be unable to hear him, and that's precisely because he is praying, and so he's supposed to be unable to perceive anything else. Or Hamlet and Shakespeare, while writing that speech for Hamlet, could be actually urging the audience to immerse themselves in some kind of suspension of disbelief and assume that Claudius is unable to hear Hamlet. That's just about the best possible explanation. But Hamlet is behind Claudius, mind you. So if this is the stage and Claudius is here at the front, praying with his front facing the audience, Hamlet comes up from behind through one of the doors. If this were an aside, the positioning on the stage would have been just the opposite. The person speaking the aside would be at the front, and the person who is not supposed to hear the aside would be at the back. But here, Hamlet is at the back. He has just emerged through one of the two doors, and there he sees Claudius in the front of the stage. So it's not an aside, definitely not an aside. And Othello, Desdemona again is in the front of the stage, or in the middle of the stage. Othello has come up from behind through one of the two doors. And he can speak now because he thinks that Desdemona is unable to hear him. She is asleep. And when he notices Desdemona stirring, her body moving a little, and she's about to wake up, he stops. She wakes, he says, and stops. And then follows a little conversation between the two of them before he kills her. So one could go on and on, speaking about acting conventions in Shakespeare's time, speaking about the different kinds of soliloquies and asides, the different uses to which the entrances and exits, the two doors at the back, were put, speaking endlessly about the references to the stage in Shakespeare's time, and speaking once again endlessly about the possibilities of age, the potential of the architectural design of the conventional Elizabethan playhouse. Now, one has to bring things to an end, as Shakespeare brought his career to an end as well with Prospero's famous reference to the Globe Theatre. Of course, recent research has tended to suggest that this old talk about Prospero's speech being some kind of Shakespeare's own farewell to the theatre is too conjectural. Even The Tempest might not have been Shakespeare's last play. That is what recent research has tended to suggest, but we're not going into that. The fact is that in The Tempest, there is this direct reference to the globe. Our revels now are ended. These are actors, as I foretold you, are all spirits, and are melted into air, into thin air. And like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, etc., etc., the great globe itself. And তারপর বলছে, we are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. We are such stuff. Not just all humanity, but actors are such stuff as dreams are made on. Reinforcing the idea that Stephen Greenblatt was to state so many years later, when he called the playhouse a house of fantasies, where fantasies are worked out, cultural fantasies, and so many other kinds of fantasies are worked out. So the whole thing is an illusion. These are actors, as I foretold you, are all spirits and are melted into air, into thin air. The baseless fabric of this vision, unsubstantial, illusory. We are such stuff, we actors. We have no real existence in this world. We are such stuff as dreams are made of. And our little life is rounded with a sleep. That is, of course, what the chorus in Romeo and Juliet calls the 2 hours traffic of our stage, after which the illusory world of Romeo and Juliet will break, and people will leave the Globe Theatre or any of the other theatres and walk out onto the streets and have their cups of tea or glasses of beer. And the world of Romeo and Juliet and the world of Macbeth, or the world of King Lear with its storms and betrayals and filial ingratitude, will have melted into air, into thin air. But before I wind up, I'll keep my promise of reading for you this opening speech from, or maybe simply reciting a few lines, where the chorus at the start of Henry V, perhaps at the newly built Globe Theatre of 1599, and let us suppose for the time being that Henry V was indeed the first play to have been performed there. And he comes onto the stage, this figure called the chorus, and he apologizes to the audience for the shortcomings of the Elizabethan stage, which he refers to in that speech as the wooden O. Now, the play is about to depict the famous Battle of Agincourt, between England and France. So I'll just see if I can open up the speech on my mobile phone very quickly. Yes, this is the prologue to the opening act. What have we here? Let's see. I'll read only part of it. But pardon, gentles all. Gentles, the audience, and particularly the nobility in the audience. ক্ষমা চাইছি তোমাদের কাছে, আপনাদের কাছে, chorus বলছে. The flat, unraised spirits. The flat, unraised spirits. The actors. Spirits again. The flat, unraised spirits that have dared on this unworthy scaffold, the wooden stage, to bring forth so great an object. The great object is the story of the play, the Battle of Agincourt. We are flat and unraised spirits. যারা সাহস করে এরকম একটা বড় একটা দৃশ্য, একটা জিনিস এই স্টেজে এনেছে. That have dared on this unworthy, অযোগ্য মঞ্চে যারা এই যুদ্ধকে দেখাবার চেষ্টা করছে. আমরা হলাম সেই actors. Can this cockpit, he calls the stage a cockpit, can this cockpit hold the vasty fields of France? Or may we cram, একটা ছোট্ট জায়গায় ঠেসে অনেক কিছু ভরিয়ে দেওয়া, এই স্টেজটা তো খুব ছোট, এটা ব্যাটলফিল্ড কি করে হবে? Or may we cram within this wooden O the very casks that did affright the air at Agincourt? The casks, the command cannons from which cannonballs were fired. May we cram them all here, the cannonballs, the cannons from which cannonballs were fired and which frightened even the air at Agincourt. Or may we cram within this wooden O, or may we cram within this wooden O the very casks that did affright the air at Agincourt. Oh, pardon, since a crooked figure may attest in little place a million. ক্ষমা করো, একটা crooked figure, man on the stage, an actor, may stand for a million people in real life. এটা ভেবে নিয়ে, এটা মেনে নিয়ে আমাদের ক্ষমা করে দাও. তারপর একটু পরে বলছে, and let us, etc., etc. I'm skipping a few words. On your imaginary forces work. He's making a direct appeal to the imagination of the audience. Suppose within the girdle of these walls, suppose that within the circumference of the stage and the playhouse are now confined two mighty monarchies, the English and the French, whose high, upreared and abutting fronts the perilous narrow ocean parts asunder. And suppose the English army is sailing to France and the French army is sometimes sailing across the seas to England and parting the narrow ocean between the two countries. Let us imagine all that. Stage to দেখাতে পারবো না, সিনেমায় দেখানো যেতে পারে. Henry V এর দুটো ভালো সিনেমা হয়েছে, Laurence Olivier 1944 and Kenneth Branagh 1989. This is about the stage. Piece out our imperfections with your thoughts. তোমাদের thoughts দিয়ে আমাদের imperfections গুলোকে পূরণ করো, তোমাদের imagination দিয়ে. Piece out, that is correct, our imperfections with your thoughts. Into 1,000 parts divide one man. When you see one man on the stage, divide him into 1,000 parts. And if you see a soldier on the stage, an actor dressed as a soldier, imagine that you're seeing 1,000 soldiers, not on the stage, but on the field of Agincourt. Into 1,000 parts divide one man and make imaginary puissance. Exercise your imagination. Think when we talk of horses that you see them printing their proud hoofs in the receiving earth. The receiving earth is the battlefield. Think when we merely mention horses, since horses cannot be brought onto the stage, that you actually see them printing their proud hoofs, galloping on the earth. Think, bhabo sheta, bhabo, kalpana karo. Imagine that you actually see the horses. For 'tis your thoughts that now must deck our kings. Carry them here and there. It's your thoughts that must carry our kings here and there. England to France and France to England. King Henry goes to France, fights the battle there, wins the battle, marries the French princess Catherine, brings her over to England. So carry them here and there, jumping o'er times, turning the accomplishment of many years into an hourglass. The play will last only 2 hours or 2.5 hours, but it's the event of several years that are being compressed into this time of performance. So use your imagination to turn the accomplishment of many years into an hourglass. For the which supply, admit me, chorus, to this history, who prologue-like your humble patience pray, gently to hear, kindly to judge our play. But this is a kind of introduction to Henry V, which the chorus gives. So he is obviously invoking the audience's participation, or to be more precise, the participation of the audience's imagination in this production of Henry V. Now, thank you very much for so patiently listening to me, and may we have a brief discussion. If time permits, the organizers will be able to say whether there is time for discussion. I fear I went on a little too long beyond the stipulated 1 hour, or I'm not sure if that was stipulated, but I hope that I have not exhausted my listeners. So if you have anything to ask, you could type something there in the chat box. If there's now, while we are at it, there's one thing that I'd like to add. If you look at the first folio edition of the plays, I spoke about this elsewhere a year ago. You will find that the punctuation of the first folio, and the editors of the first folio, John Hemming and Henry Condell, who were Shakespeare's friends and also stakeholders in the King's Men, the acting company for which Shakespeare wrote, they had access to Shakespeare's foul papers, the manuscripts, which have now been lost. And they punctuated the texts on the basis of the punctuation in the foul papers. Shakespeare যেমন ভাবে নিজে তার পাণ্ডুলিপিতে punctuate করেছিল লাইনসগুলো, সেইভাবে ফার্স্ট ফোলিওতে punctuationটা more or less হয়েছে. Modern editors, such as the editor of the Arden series or the New Cambridge series, the Oxford Shakespeare, the Penguin Shakespeare, and all these modern editions, they punctuate the lines following the rules of grammar. ব্যাকরণের যে রুলস আছে কি করে লাইন্স পাংচুয়েট করতে হয়, সেই রুলস ফলো করে লাইন্সগুলো পাংচুয়েট করা হয়, because these are texts to be read usually by researchers and scholars and students and teachers in the classroom. Shakespeare was writing for the actors. Who were the actors? Richard Burbage. The Fool was earlier played by William Kemp, who would perform all kinds of antics on the stage, farcical elements. সেই ধরনের ফুল আমরা শেক্সপিয়ারের early plays এ পাই. তারপরে he was replaced by Robert Armin, who was a more serious sort of fool, and King Lear সেখানে যে ফুল আছে, এবং the fool in Twelfth Night Feste, the clown. There's a slight distinction between clown and fool. These were parts written for Robert Armin. So these were the major actors in Shakespeare's time, and Shakespeare knew his actors well, knew the kind of breath control that they had, how much they could speak in one breath before they needed to pause. সেই বুঝে, keeping his actors' capabilities in mind, লাইন্সগুলোকে punctuate করেছিল. That was how Shakespeare punctuated the lines, keeping in mind the actors and how much of breath control they had. For example, if it were done, when 'tis done, comma, then 'twere well it were done quickly. There's a pause, another punctuation. If the assassination could trammel up the, etc., etc. When the actor speaks, he may not stop. If it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly. If the assassination could trammel up the consequence and catch with his surcease success, that but this blow might be the be-all and the end-all here, but here upon this bank and shoal of time, etc. So এখানে আমরা এই পজগুলো পাচ্ছি না। ফার্স্ট ফোলিওর পাংচুয়েশন দেখবে এরকম, কোনো পাংচুয়েশন ওখানে মানে the text is very, very scantily punctuated. If you follow the punctuation in the first folio, you will get clues to how the lines were spoken in Shakespeare's time, which is something that we cannot very well understand when we look at the grammatical punctuation in more recent editions of Shakespeare's plays. All right, so may we wind up? May we wind up? If we may wind up, one of the organizers could. Oh, I see. We have a few questions. Shushanta Mondal says, "We think you ended it too early, sir." Well, one has to end. One has to end when people like you think that something has ended too early, because only that ensures that listeners are not bored or exhausted. Okay, so one of the organizers wants me to wait for a few moments because there may be questions. Abrita Dr. Gupta asks, well, how did the uneducated audience understand the mythological references used by Shakespeare and his contemporaries? Well, Abrita, they did not. They did not. As a matter of fact, they did not understand the classical allusions or the mythological allusions that we have in Shakespeare's plays. Now, Shakespeare wrote for just about everyone. Some of the plays were performed at court, in private theatres such as the Blackfriars Theatre. The first performance of Macbeth in 1606 was at the Blackfriars Theatre. The first public performance of Macbeth at the Globe Theatre was only in 1610, 4 years after the first private performance. So the audience in the Blackfriars Theatre during the first performance of Macbeth would have understood some of the allusions that the audience 4 years later at the Globe would not have. And this is only to be expected. But the audience in the public playhouses would not have really bothered about that, so long as there was a bit of sex and violence and a bit of the supernatural and a few daggers on the stage and a few drops of blood spilling over. And moreover, the audience in the public theatres was heterogeneous. So there could be educated people there as well. And it was not as if all the people there were absolute fools and antisocials and highway robbers and ruffians. No, there were such people in the audience, very true, but there were also people who could understand the finer points in Shakespeare. For example, there were people who could have understood the subtext of the porter's scene, of the porter's lines in Macbeth. I'm really averse to calling it the porter's scene because the scene carries on for a long while after the porter has spoken his final lines. So it's more of an episode, more of the porter episode than the porter's scene, really, for me. There were people, and there would surely be people, who would understand the tragic import, the subtext of each of the porter's lines. And there would be people who would be simply taking the porter lines to be vulgar, even obscene, and maybe laughing and whistling and jeering and cheering in the audience. There would be all kinds of people in the public playhouse. And therefore, if you were going there with your family one afternoon, you had to be very discreet about where you would sit and how much you would pay for the production, because you had to ensure that you sat among the more educated and more polished people and not among people in whose company you might have felt uncomfortable. All right, so there's a very kind note of gratitude from the organizers, Butler College, Daton, which reads, on behalf of the college authority, the departments of Bengali and English, teachers, students, and people attached with the college, we express our sincere thanks and gratitude. We hope the lecture will be immensely beneficial for our students. I hope so, and I'll be very happy if the students have liked it and have learned something from it, and if they have just begun to feel at the end of it that Shakespeare, after all, was not a very bad man. He was not too difficult, and that he can be enjoyed and read with profit. So I'll read the last few lines of this beautiful note. We appeal to the scholarly community to be with us and help us in making the platform a successful open access site for the scholarly collaboration and exchange. So yes, my best wishes are with you, the organizers of this wonderful interaction, and I am particularly grateful to my former student Mir Ahmed Ali, who now teaches at Butler College, Nathun. It's always a pleasure to be able to do something for a person that you have cared for and loved, and this young scholar is certainly one such person, a very hard worker, and the students are fortunate to have such a wonderful department. Torun Taposh and Mir Ahmed, I'm sure, they always have the good of the students and the college in mind, and we look forward to seeing more and more of their active participation in the academic community in the days to come. And let's now call it a day with the hope and prayer that this hard time gets over quickly. All right, we have a couple of more questions. One is from Abhishek Roy, another former student of mine, who says, I wonder when Tagore was objecting against the gaudiness of the Western stage with all its display and paraphernalia, surely he was not keeping Shakespeare and his time in mind. Well, no, he was not keeping Shakespeare and his time in mind. That's important, Shakespeare's time, because in later years, particularly during the Restoration period, Shakespeare's plays began to be performed with a lot of fanfare and with a lot of background scenery and music and all that. So it's Shakespeare's time that's important. In his own time, the stage was bare, and the bareness, as I pointed out, was compensated for by the magic of Shakespeare's words and Shakespeare's lines. Riya Dash Mohapatra has a question. Sir, how is the contemporary time reflected in Shakespeare's drama? In drama, well, I think she means Shakespeare's drama. But I'm not sure what you mean by contemporary. If by contemporary you mean our present time, well, the present time is not really reflected in Shakespeare's drama, but Shakespeare's drama may be related to our own time. That's, I think, the right way of putting it, because Shakespeare had yet to see the 20th and 21st centuries, and he couldn't really reflect them, the period that had not yet been born at all in his time, in his plays. But his plays can be relevant today. I think that's the point that Riya is making, and she clarifies with another statement. I mean, the worldview. Well, it's a question that will require a very, very long answer. There are so many things in Shakespeare's plays that refer to his own time. If by contemporary time you mean the time that is contemporaneous with Shakespeare, there are references to all kinds of sports, football, for example, in King Lear. There are references to bear baiting, example, the reference that we have to bear baiting in Macbeth. There are references to other kinds of sports as well. There are references to the plague a number of times in King Lear, and there are references to contemporary attitudes towards the supernatural. There are references to the gunpowder plot. There are references to, well, so many other things in Shakespeare. And mind you, in Shakespeare's time, although Shakespeare would often go back to earlier times in history and also set his plays in other countries, the actors wore Elizabethan costumes. Unlike today, when a play like Antony and Cleopatra or Coriolanus or Julius Caesar would be performed in Roman costumes, or sometimes even in modern-day costumes, in Shakespeare's time, these plays would be performed in Elizabethan costumes. suggesting again a kind of bringing the plays closer to Shakespeare's own time, and therefore making the world of the play more acceptable and more intelligible to Shakespeare's audience. Take, for example, this passage from Christopher Marlowe's Edward II, who again does the same thing. In the opening speech, Gaveston devises ways to please the king. The king has sent for Gaveston. He has called him back to England through a letter. He had been expelled and sent away to France. And Gaveston is now devising ways of pleasing the king. And he says, I will have Italian masks by night. Italian masks? Now, in the historical period to which Edward II belongs, or Gaveston belongs, Italian masks were unheard of. They came to England only with the Renaissance. And Edward II was a late medieval king. So, what Marlowe is doing here is he is superimposing something that's very contemporary, something that's part of his own time, onto a depiction, a dramatization of an earlier period in history. And so Gaveston, who in the historical period that is here dramatized, could never have said, I will have Italian masks by night, here in the play is able to say that. Italian masks. They came into England from Renaissance Italy. Well, this is how even Shakespeare, Marlowe, Shakespeare, and all the other playwrights of the time seek to make their plays contemporary. There are several other ways of answering your question, but I'm afraid that that will be too long an answer. I'm only dropping hints for you, Ria, in answer to your question. There's a question from Mir Muhammad Ali. Thank you for the lecture, sir. Please tell us something about Irfan Khan Vishal Bharadwaj's Maqbool, an adaptation of Shakespeare's Macbeth. Well, again, that will require a very long answer. I'm not sure if we have the time for that. One of the most interesting things that I found in Maqbool, now there are so many things that I could say about Maqbool. I could go on for an hour. We all could. Those who have seen and loved Maqbool could spend hours talking about Maqbool and Haider and Omkara and these films. I'll give you a very short answer because even attempting to look at Maqbool in a more comprehensive way at the moment will be very daring and very ambitious. There are so many things to be said about it. But the most striking feature for me when I first watched Maqbool was how the hallucination of the dagger that Macbeth has is replaced by blood on the floor. All right, that becomes now. See, it's a film after all, and there has been cinema. For example, Roman Polanski's Macbeth, which shows a dagger floating through the air, and the actor John Finch, who plays Macbeth there, follows the dagger. I think this I think was cinematically more appropriate, replacing the vision of the dagger with the vision of blood on the floor, on the ground. No one knows where the blood has come from. It could be blood from a slaughtered goat. It could be blood from something else as well. But so far as I remember, I saw Maqbool around the last time I saw it, I think it was a couple of years ago. And possibly, I'm not sure, but Vishal Bharadwaj could have taken a hint from Kurosawa's Throne of Blood, where there are marks of blood on the wall immediately before Macbeth goes to kill the Lord of Spiderweb Castle. But that again is a very good adaptation of Macbeth, Throne of Blood. So what struck me was how the witches in Macbeth are replaced by tantrics. There has been another tantric production of Macbeth directed by Alec Padamsey that was around 10 or 12 years ago, maybe a little more than that. The two policemen in Maqbool. and how the underworld, the murky underworld of Mumbai becomes an adequate substitute for the very troubled Scotland, rife with vaulting ambition and treachery that we find in Macbeth, or the 16th century samurai Japan that we find in Throne of Blood. Once again, a society that was deeply disturbed and troubled with ambition that would result in treachery and killing and bloodshed. What is missing in Makbul, perhaps, is the cyclic pattern of crime, which is suggested in Macbeth by the sudden disappearance of Donalbain and the fact that he's never seen again, and by Fleance being kept alive at the end of the play, which suggests all kinds of possibilities. And Roman Polanski's film of Macbeth shows Donalbain riding towards the witches on horseback, and that is the final scene of Polanski's film. In Throne of Blood, Macbeth is killed by his own men, unlike in Shakespeare's play, where he is killed by Macduff, who has now gone over into the enemy camp. The fact that he's killed by his own men is a repetition of the kind of treachery that Washizu, who is the Macbeth figure in Throne of Blood, exercised when he killed the Lord of the Castle. And the Lord of the Castle himself had become Lord of the Castle by killing the previous Lord. Now, that suggestion is not as pronounced in Macbeth as it is in Throne of Blood. In Makbul, I don't think there is much of a suggestion of that at all. The circularity of betrayal, this cyclic pattern of betrayal. Of course, one would think that in an underworld, in a murky underworld of dons and criminals, this could go on. This could be circular. This could go on endlessly. But the suggestion is not as pronounced as in Throne of Blood or in Shakespeare's play. Makbul is also, I wouldn't say that it's very consciously and deliberately Indianized. Well, it is because the setting is the Mumbai underworld. Kashmir, trouble-torn Kashmir of the 1990s becomes the setting of Hyder. So to that extent, we have very recognizable Indian settings. But the action itself could have taken place, in any part of the world. The kind of action that we have could have taken place in any part of the world. So when we say that the play is Indianized in Makbul, in Bharadwaj's film, I have some trouble in identifying too many things about the film that could be very distinctively Indian. There are a few things, definitely, but perhaps not too many. In Throne of Blood, on the contrary, there are plenty of things that are very exclusively Japanese. But I don't think there are so many things that are exclusively Indian in Makbul. But of course, it's an excellent adaptation and could rank with Throne of Blood as one of the great cinematic adaptations of Macbeth, one of the great transcultural film adaptations of Macbeth in non-Anglophone cultures. Yes, Bunishika Maiti wants me to suggest some good books on the subject. Now, for a preliminary reader, there could be this very old book from the 1950s, which is still excellent, An Introduction to Shakespeare by G.B. Harrison, which I still find very, very useful. For the more advanced reader, there are the 4 volumes of E.K. Chambers' book, The Elizabethan Stage, volumes 1 to 4 by E.K. Chambers. And there are 2 volumes of another book by E.K. Chambers called Shakespeare, Facts and Problems. There is a book by Amir Ali, An Introduction to Shakespeare, something of that sort. I may not have given you a very accurate title, you can always look up Amir Ali on the internet, and you'll find the correct name of the book. And there's a very good book on soliloquies. It's called Shakespeare and the Soliloquy in Early Modern English Drama. Shakespeare and the Soliloquy in Early Modern English Drama. It's edited by A.D. Cousins, A.D. D as in Denmark, D. Cousins, 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 and Daniel Derin, Daniel, D-A-N-I-E-L, Derin, D-E-R-R-I-N. So edited by A.D. Cousins and Daniel Derin. And the title of the book is Shakespeare and the Soliloquy in Early Modern English Drama. Bholanath Dash has a question. Can Shakespeare be called a crime storyteller with retribution in respect to Macbeth and Hamlet? With respect to a number of other plays as well, yes. In fact, if there are cinematic adaptations or novelizations of these plays, they could be turned into crime thrillers. They could be. In fact, to commemorate the 400 years of Shakespeare's death in 2016, a number of novelists, 8 novelists, were commissioned to write novels in English based on plays by Shakespeare. Margaret Atwood, for example, and she was the most famous of all the novelists who were commissioned to do this, and she wrote a novel called Hagseed, based on The Tempest. Hagseed, of course, is how Caliban is described in one of the passages in Shakespeare's Tempest, so that expression is taken over from the text itself. All the novels were written in English except one. A Norwegian author, Jo Nesbø, J-O pronounced Jo, Nesbø, N-E-S-B-O, wrote a book in Norwegian which was later translated into English, and this was called Macbeth. And this is the only novel among the 8 novels that were written which had a title that was identical with the title of the play on which it was based. And it was also the only play which was not originally written in English. Nesbø was chosen to write this novelized version of Macbeth because Nesbø has a reputation of being a writer of crime fiction. He's a writer of thrillers and crime fiction. And that is the reason why he was chosen to write this novel based on Macbeth. Now, this was a very important event, this commissioning of 8 novelists to rewrite in novelized form 8 plays by Shakespeare. And there's a Shakespeare gift shop just outside, next door to Shakespeare's birthplace in Stratford-upon-Avon, and they sell all kinds of things. It's a bit touristy. They have lots of nice things there, including a wide range of books. And there's a separate rack there where we have these 8 novels. So they are now being considered very important for even scholarly examination, and maybe there will be some research on these novels very soon. There has been one in our department. One of my MPhil scholars wrote a thesis on 3 of these novels, taking 3 of them because one cannot write a very long MPhil thesis, but in times to come, surely we may be seeing more of research on this sort of engagement with Shakespeare. All right, Shundip Dash has a question. Many times questions come up about Shakespeare's authorship. What do you want to say about it? Well, Shundip, not that I want to say anything about it, but of course, if you have a question such as that for me, I must say something. Broadly, there are 2 schools of thought, 2 schools of people, the Oxfordians and the Stratfordians. The Oxfordians have come up with all kinds of theories about authorship, even suggesting things like Queen Elizabeth herself in disguise writing Shakespeare, or some Arab ruler called Sheikh Zbir being the author of the plays, or Christopher Marlowe never having died at all in the tavern brawl, but having survived that assault and having lived on under a different name, William Shakespeare, to go on writing plays. There have been all kinds of suggestions. And there are several books on the authorship of Shakespeare's plays. The Stratfordians, on the other hand, firmly have their foot on the ground, so to speak, and they assert, well, William Shakespeare, born in 1564 and who died and was buried in 1616, is the author of these plays, and have no second thoughts about that. Of course, there's been a lot of collaboration as well. There's been a lot of collaboration, and particularly the late plays, such as Henry VIII, were written in collaboration with other writers, such as Beaumont and Fletcher. In Macbeth, there's a song which is only suggested, only the first few words of the song are mentioned, come away, witch, etc. And the witches are supposed to sing that song. The complete text is not given in the text, in the editions that we use. So if you were to use the Arden edition and direct the students of your college or university to perform the play, what song would you use there? Now, the common conjecture is that in Shakespeare's time, a song from a play by Middleton, the play was called The Witch, was used. Now, whether The Witch was written first, whether Middleton had written that play first and Shakespeare wrote Macbeth later, or whether it was the other way around, has for long been a matter of conjecture. But if Shakespeare had written the play first, then he would have probably written the whole song too, and wouldn't have simply left it at that line, come away, witch, etc. Or it could be that he simply mentioned the first line and the actors sang the whole song, but it was not part of the foul papers, or didn't, for that reason, make its way into the first folio of Macbeth. হয়তো Shakespeare পুরো গানটা লেখার প্রয়োজন মনে করেনি. It could have been a popular song of the time, তাই প্রথম লাইনটাই লিখে ছেড়ে দিয়েছে, অ্যাক্টরসরা বুঝে গিয়েছিল যে কোন গান গাইতে হবে. কিন্তু মিডলটনের নাটকটাতে পুরো গানটাই আছে, beginning with the line come away, witch. So if Middleton's play was written later, Middleton decided, for reasons that were best known to him, to incorporate the whole song, which Shakespeare, who might have written his play earlier, did not do. But I would rather choose to think that Middleton had written the play earlier. Shakespeare had the song that was there in Middleton's play in his mind when he simply put the first line of the play in his first line of the song in his play, and he didn't incorporate the whole song because the song had already then been performed on the stage during performances of Middleton's play, and so the actors would know what song to sing. আমি একটু আগেই বলছিলাম যে যদি ফার্স্ট ফোলিওটা দেখো, দেখবে যে টেক্সটের পাংচুয়েশনগুলো অ্যাক্টার্সদের মাথায় রেখে লেখা. তো যদি অ্যাক্টার্সরা জেনেই থাকতো যে গানটা কি গান, গানের বাকি লাইনগুলো কি, তাহলে বাকি লাইনগুলো নাটকটার মধ্যে লেখার দরকার ছিল না বলেই হয়তো শেক্সপিয়ার মনে করেছে. সেই ক্ষেত্রে আমরা ধরে নিতে পারি যে মিডলটনের নাটকটা হয়তো আগে লেখা হয়েছে, সেই কারণে শেক্সপিয়ারের নাটকে. তো when we talk of collaboration and authorship, this becomes an interesting case study. This matter of the song beginning with "Come Away, Death" in Macbeth. All right, Rupali Mishra, sir, from those Shakespearean dramas like Macbeth, King Lear, Hamlet, how was the impact? What was the impact on society? Of course, these were very profound plays with a lot of things to say about human life, and with a lot of things to say about emotions and passions, about love and about matters of the heart. There was a lot of serious engagement with philosophy. King Lear, for example, when he is exposed to the storm, he realizes that it's no good simply sitting on the throne dressed in kingly garments. His exposure to hardship in the sequence of storm scenes, where he has nothing on his body save only a piece of cloth around his waist, probably. This has taught him to sympathize with poor people who have no roofs over their heads. And so when Kent points out a hovel to him and asks him to go inside, and the fool beckons to him to go inside. Lear says, Tumra jao, you go in. Ami age pray kor, I'll pray and then I'll sleep. And he kneels on the heath, looks up at the heavens, the ceiling on the stage, and imagines that all around him are the poor, suffering people of the world. And he prays on their behalf, and he prays while addressing them. Poor naked wretches, wheresoe'er you are, that bide the pelting of this pitiless storm, how shall your houseless heads and unfed sides, your looped and windowed raggedness defend you from seasons such as these? Oh, I have taken too little care of this. He says that he has not yet bothered about these things so far. Take physic, pomp. He addresses himself as pomp. He has been a pompous ruler with all the trappings of kingship all around him. Now he says, take physic. Expose yourself to the rawness of nature, to the elements of nature. Take physic, pomp. Expose thyself to feel what wretches feel, that thou mayst shake the superflux to them and show the heavens more just, so that the unequal distribution of wealth may be sorted out, so that the heavens may appear more just in the distribution of wealth. It's very Marxist in a way, isn't it? And one could apply a Marxist theory very successfully to what's happening to King Lear, the kind of evolution, the kind of metamorphosis that Lear undergoes. He becomes filled with concern for the wretches, and he wishes to even out the distribution of power and wealth and be one now with the poor naked wretches, so that the excess of grandeur and pomp and wealth may be shaken off, যাতে সেটা ঝেড়ে ফেলা যায়, that thou mayst shake the superflux to them and show the heavens more just. And later, a little before that, before he has moved out into the storm, he is speaking to Regan. Regan has just told him that he doesn't even need one knight. What need one? Lear bolche necessityর rationalization হতে পারে না, যুক্তি দিয়ে কি প্রয়োজন আর কি অপ্রয়োজন সেটা বোঝানো যায় না. Oh, reason not the need, he says. যেটা আজ তোমার কাছে প্রয়োজনীয়, এই যে সুন্দর পোশাক পরে তুমি আছো, তুমি মনে করছো তোমার কাছে প্রয়োজনীয়, আর একজন ভিখারি সে কিছু না পরেই বেঁচে থাকে. Oh, reason not the need. Our basest beggars are in the poorest things superfluous. Oh, allow not nature more than nature needs. Man's life is cheap as beasts. If you don't give man anything more than man actually needs, man will still survive. Man will survive like beasts do. অন্য পশুরা তো সার্ভাইভ করে, এরকম সুন্দর সুন্দর গার্মেন্টস তারা পরে না. This is the kind of philosophy that might have surely had some impact on playgoers, যারা দেখতে যেত নাটকগুলোকে. They might have gone into the playhouse to see a bit of fighting and a bit of romance and some shipwrecks and storms. And in the bargain, as a bonus, they also got heavy doses of philosophy, profound wisdom. একটা জিনিস বলি, সেটা হচ্ছে যে the tragedies. Aristotle catharsis-এর কথা বলেছে, আমরা catharsis নিয়ে আলোচনা করি, purgation of the emotions of pity and fear. In Shakespeare's time, for a long while, before the practice was banned for certain reasons, there would be a jig on the stage. Jig, a kind of dance. A kind of dance. Hamlet-এ বলছে না, Polonius সম্বন্ধে player king-কে Hamlet বলছে, he's for a jig or a piece of bawdry. He's the kind of person who is suitable for jigs. লাফালাফি করবে, নাচানাচি করবে, এই বলে ব্যঙ্গ করছে Polonius-কে Hamlet. A jig was a dance. এখনো যদি তুমি গ্লোব থিয়েটারে যাও, দেখবে একটা ট্র্যাজেডি তুমি দেখলে, আমি দেখেছিলাম জুলিয়াস সিজার, এবং জুলিয়াস সিজার যখন শেষ হলো, এই ব্রুটাস যে সিজারকে হত্যা করেছে বা ক্যাসিয়াস যে সিজারকে হত্যা করেছে, সবাই একজন আরেকজনের হাত ধরে নাচতে শুরু করলো। এই যে এখন দেখবে যদি শেক্সপিয়ার্স গ্লোব এই ওয়েবসাইটে যাও, তাদের একটা ইউটিউব লিঙ্ক আছে। এই লকডাউন পিরিয়ডে দে আর স্ট্রিমিং পারফরমেন্সেস অফ শেক্সপিয়ার। নাও দে আর প্রবাবলি স্ট্রিমিং রোমিও অ্যান্ড জুলিয়েট, হ্যামলেট ইজ ওভার, এরপরে আরো 2-3টে নাটক আছে। At the end, there may be these jigs where Juliet and Romeo and Romeo's father and Juliet's father and the friar who had secretly married Romeo and Juliet and Paris and the other characters, they all come onto